Electric Cafe.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Electric Cafe. Today in this video I'll be counting down my top 10 IDM artists of all time, finishing my top 50 list, and I've really enjoyed putting this list together for everybody. I think one of the hardest things about this list is ranking them, but strangely enough, I feel really solid about the top 5, and really even the top 10. It was more in the 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s. Like those ones were a little bit more difficult to rank. I feel pretty confident of this list because that's kind of what started the list. Is you start placing ones and then you kind of fill out the list and then you kind of compare. And I always find that challenging and fun. And I love doing lists. You'll see in the as the channel goes on. I enjoy doing lists. I'll probably do a list on everything when it comes to albums and songs and styles and things like that. So hopefully you guys enjoy those. If you'd like to support the channel, in my profile there's a link for a PayPal. And if you'd like to donate monthly or a donation, a one-time donation, I would really appreciate it. When you do lists like this and you do them pretty in depth, you're always gonna forget an artist and even though I try to be very thorough and take my time in doing these type of lists, to make sure I include everybody that I want to, I still mess up, and I certainly forgot a couple artists. And one of the ones that I feel silly in forgetting was Ruxpin. So that was kind of a big miss on me. So he would definitely be in this list if I was to redo it. So, maybe in the future I'll do an addendum list. But on my Discogs page, I do, if you guys know Discogs, you can do lists, and so it's that list is I did adjust that and put them in there. So a lot of my lists, they'll also be on my Discogs page as well. So if you know me on Discogs or you've seen some of my reviews on Discogs, any of my lists will be on there as well. So as we count down the list here, you'll hear one of my favorite songs by the artist, and then I will come back to you and just give you some overall thoughts on the artist and just some of my experience with the artist. right, so that was artist number 10, Prom, aka Richard Bailey. And I first started listening or I first got wind of his music back in 2001 with his still one of my favorite by him. It was called Negative. 2001 it came out, and then somewhere around that time I ended up getting his debut album called Burnt Plate Number One, which is really good. But he definitely came into his own on Negative, and he's one of those artists that have been on some fantastic labels like Merc and M5, MD, which those are classic IDM labels around the turn of the century. And this then he went to songs for the City Bus in 2004. I'm not great with album names and song names, so bear with me while I kind of run through their career. And then he's on N5 MD with Live MD 2004. Socially Inept was really good in 2004. He's back on Merc Records. Again on Merc Records with You Shall Have Been. Those are probably, this one's probably in my top three as well, with Socially Inept and Negative. Those are probably my top three. And then 2007 he was back on N5 MD with A Permanent Solution. And then also 2010's Enough Conflict. So just from like 1999 to 2010, he was just on a roll during that period. Just some fantastic stuff. And then he had a couple years break, and in the past 15 years since, he's put out 4 albums, and 2 have been on self-released, not on a label. He did have one album in 2019 called Until Here for Years. That was on N5 MD. That actually had a CD release. Now that one's in my want list. But of those 4 since 2010, only one had a physical release, and that just sadly kind of shows I wouldn't say the decline, but maybe the lack of interest, or really the lack of labels that were supporting IDM artists. I know Merc closed, and N5 MD has been pretty much around for the most part, and they were the ones that released this 2019 release. But going through Prom's discography kind of made me think about like how we need some more IDM labels to support these artists, and I'm not sure why they're not getting to some of the ones that are out there, like Touched. I know Martin does a great job over at Touched, or maybe even Detuned, even though I know they're a little bit more focused on techno. But I hope there's some labels out there that start, this like a resurgence in some of this IDM stuff starts coming around again to support these artists and get some more of their releases out, especially in physical ways or physical formats. And it's just, I don't know if Prom's doing music anymore, but when you look at his discography, there's he hasn't done an album for 4 or 5 years. Like, I don't know if that's because of the labels out there and supporting, or maybe he's doing other things. Could be a combination of both. Could be one or the other. But it just kind of like looking through this catalog kind of reminded me like we need some more labels out there that support this great music. But anyways, getting back to Prom, I really like his balance of melancholy melodies and jittery beats, and definitely he's got that vintage kind of IDM sound. It got, as you can see, I got 9 of his CDs just right here. Plus, I have some other vinyl ones as well. Some singles he's done over the years, and just a very prolific producer for those times, and definitely one of my favorites as far as that turn of the century sound in IDM. And that was number 10, Prom. All right, so let's go on to number 9. right, so that was number 9, Manual. Manual is Jonas Monk, and I've been a big fan of Manual's pretty much since he first started. I was around 2000, 2001. I was starting to follow more music, and I was finding so much great artists in IDM and also just down tempo, ambient, and they also kind of went into shoegaze. And Jonas Monk, kind of led that sort of combination of those styles. And when I first heard his Until Tomorrow in 2001, just vintage IDM sound here, just perfectly it's just a great example of IDM in 2001. You got the melancholy music, you got some jittery beats, but also he has a great pace to his music and the way he develops his tracks. And then also Ascend, which came out in 2002, was really good. And he started around here. He started right away. Started to add a lot of shoegaze and guitar into his tracks, and he kind of got away from a little bit of the more mechanical IDM pretty quickly, and went into adding shoegaze and Jonas Monk. If you know his music, he has a big background in also krautrock and also ambient. So he's done some music under those styles as well, and sort of added those at times into his IDM. Azura Vista came out in 2005, and then he moved to Darla Records. So you got Bajarmar, I believe that's how you pronounce it, in 2006. Somewhere along the line, I lost his 2008 album Confluence, but here's 2010, Drowned in Light, really good one. And then his last one in 2012, called The Wash, which is really great as well. And so also his EP, Sorry, is really excellent as well. One of my favorite tracks is on here. And maybe I'm not sure which one I'll play. That's going to be one of the hardest things about doing this video, is choosing one song to represent these artists in the video. And, so I won't necessarily have my favorite in there, but it'll be one there. That way I don't have to decide and have to put too much effort forth into choosing the one song by every artist and just putting up one there. But, unfortunately, around 2012, that was his last album he did under Manual, and then he moved on to doing some solo work. Here's his Altered Lights, which recently came out. And then also he moved to Billow Observatory, which if you've heard, a little bit more ambient, certainly worth checking out. There is I wouldn't say a touch of IDM in there, but he's pretty much gone away from the beats for the most part, and they're sort of evolving. There is still some shimmering kind of shoegaze in there a little bit with some guitar parts, but it's certainly more ambient and I wouldn't say field recording a little bit, but certainly more into the sparser ambient. But I still feel like there's a little bit of glitch in there. Excuse me, just not the obvious kind of glitch that you would think if I said that. Especially around the earlier 2000s. This is more in the last few years, but I've continued to follow Jonas Monk through the last 25 years now almost, and he's just a fantastic producer, and one that I'll be a fan of his music as he keeps going on. I hope he comes back with the Manual style sometime in the future. I really enjoyed that style as well. Him making a little bit more beat-oriented ambient music in IDM. So, yeah, that's number 9, Manual. So coming in at number 8 is Beaumont Hanna. And when you think of Beaumont Hanna, he has a very unique style, especially in the time when he was doing IDM from like 93 to like 96, 97. He was mostly on GPR records, and that's where most of his releases were on. And when you think of like Autech and Aphex Twin, probably the key figures in those years, like Beaumont style was a little bit different, and a little bit more intricate in some ways. And when I think of like all the people that get like, when people mention the the heroes of IDM, and some of the best artists of all time, I think Beaumont would be mentioned in that if he would have done more music as the 90s went on. But he only did IDM style for a couple of years there, and but those couple of years just a lot of great music. And it started with his 1993 album called Basic Data Manipulations, which Taste and Textures Volume 2. Have it on CD and vinyl here. As you can see, I got a copy probably somewhere around 2005 at Plan 9 Records, if you know that, in Richmond. Excuse me, $8. So that was a good steal. But his amazing Texturology in 1994 is an excellent album. It's usually, I would think most people consider it his best album. You also have doing these videos. It gives me an opportunity to show off some of my collection, which is always cool. He also did a really good album under You, which is a little bit lesser known, but equally as good. He also loved this fantastic EP, Psionics, which has an amazing remix of Autech on there. And then also, I think it's a Omiya or Mia, the single as well. That was one of his last EPs. I do have a couple more on GPR with the Texturology series, and also there's a couple other ones I have. Textures and Taste and Textures EP and Taste and Textures Volume 3. I have those on GPR as well, but I couldn't find those. But yeah, amazing producer, and unfortunately he just did music for a couple years, but some fantastic stuff. Definitely check out his Europa reprised EP as well with Legowski, which is excellent as well. Coming in number 7 is Fernando Corona, who goes by the name of Murkoff. And Murkoff did 4 really quintessential IDM albums in the early 2000s, and all of them were on the Leaf label. And the great thing I like about Fernando's music is for me, he was the first one to tie like a classical style of the way he injected classical music into IDM was just, for me, it was like he was like the first one to do that. And it just brought like another deeper level to the melancholy parts and the darker parts and some of the orchestral parts and just the rhythms and stuff like that. They're a little bit more like a different timbre, different colors because they're using some more wooden instruments and stuff that may not normally have been used in IDM for the time. And after the first four IDM albums, he's gone into like classical music and soundtrack music, and it's all worth checking out. Some of it's really dark, some of it's really beautiful, and but as far as like his IDM stuff, like his first four albums were just awesome. And it's for him to be this high up and only did four albums, as well as Beaumont Hannah, you can just tell like the impact they had on me, just with a little bit amount of work. And it started out with 2002's Martez, great album, and then 2004's Utopia. The Murkoff albums just recently got reissued, so definitely get a chance. On this one they got combined. The Martez and also Utopia got combined on this one. I still haven't opened up because I have them all on CDs, but this one looks like a 3-disc set, which is really great. And then also in 2005 was Remembranza. It's almost hard to say, Rembranza. 2007, and this one has my favorite track on it. Just love. I want to say it's I think it's the second track. I think it's the first track, which is probably the one I'll play in the video. You might have just heard it, but fantastic. Here again, it got reissued here. I think these got reissued in 2022. So I bought all the reissues, and then his last album, 2007's Cosmos, which is probably overall is my favorite, and you can really see his trajectory from those four albums to more the vintage style IDM with Martez and Utopia. Rembranza started to add more classical music, and then Cosmos is probably his most spacey, minimal, and deepest. And because it was my favorite at the time, I did track down an original copy sometime around 2008 or 2009 after the album was released, and then I still bought a reissue of 2022. You can see they kind of look like I guess they kept the same artwork, but I don't know, it looks a little bit, maybe just looks a little bit shinier, but it looks like they kept the same artwork. And then also his Ulysses Urana EP as well on Leaf is really excellent as well. And just to mention it, one album that I do really like of his newer style is Lost in Time. Very deep album. And on some of these albums, you'll see my reviews on Discog as well, especially Lost in Time. But just an excellent producer, and I hope in the future is maybe IDM sort of has a resurgence that we'll see some more beat-oriented Murkoff albums in the future. All right, so that was number 6, Phonem. And Phonem's real name is Elliot Perkins, and I first got wind of his music back on More Records back in 2000, and with his Hydroelectric CD. For the life of me, I could not find my Phonem records, which is only 3 of them because there's only 3 of them on vinyl that I have of the 4 that he has. I don't have Mechanic Verses. I still haven't heard that yet. That's his first original album. That was on a smaller label called Jetlag. I never got around to getting that yet, but it started for me at Hydroelectric, and I love Phonem's balance of like some of his best, most iconic tracks for me. Like have this balance of like super dark and super beautiful at the same time, very mechanical as well. I almost consider him like one of the closest ones to like an Autech style when I think of some of their best work. Their third album with Airvane is excellent, called Air Valid, which again I also have on vinyl. And then his last one, Elisu, came out in 2002, again on More Records. And a lot of really good melancholy. This was a little bit more melancholy than his earlier stuff. And then again, I couldn't find his vinyl. The Phonetic is his EP on More Music. That one's fantastic. It includes one of my favorite tracks of his. But yeah, that's number 6, Phonem. Excellent producer. Coming in at number 5 is Aerovane. And man, Aerovane's early career when he was on DIN and City Center offices and Vertical Form, just amazing. Those 4 albums. I Call, Distron, excellent. Atoll, Scrap, amazing. Tides, fantastic. And then it wrapped up with Lilies, which is very underrated as well. And then, he had a break for like 8 or 9 years, and then finally, the Palor came out, and that one's fantastic. That was sort of like a return to form for him after a long break. And then in the past, 10 years or so, he's been doing more ambient music and a little bit into classical music and also dub techno here and there. Been very prolific through the last, probably the last decade or so. Quite a few albums and a lot to go over, but those are a little bit more classical again and ambient and even dub techno. But his earlier career, his first 4 or 5 albums, and some of his EPs, especially on DIN and the stuff on City Center offices, just fantastic IDM stuff. And he puts such a whimsical, I wouldn't even say whimsical, but the way that he does the melodies into his very clean beats are just fantastic. And one thing I really like about Aerovane too is he never goes overboard on his jittery beats. And there's a lot of artists in IDM style that, here and there, some of their songs, like some of their beats are kind of like trying to be overdone and maybe too hip and too clever and stuff like that. And it gets to a point where they sound really dated. And I don't think with Aerovane, like any of his tracks really sound dated. And even the ones that you're like, okay, well that was definitely done in like 2000. Even those you're like, it was very well done for the time. And none of Aerovane's stuff is cheesy. Like Aerovane to me is almost like the Ulrich Schnau like of IDM. Even though I have Ulrich Schnau on this, I still consider him IDM, but maybe not so much because he quickly changed after his first album or two into a little bit more soundtrack music and going into classical and stuff like that. But like when I think of like the more jittery stuff like Aerovane does, like his beats were very clean and I still think are way above average for IDM artists. Like looking back at that time, and his stuff on DIN was just some amazing stuff. And it's in some ways it's his DIN stuff is still a little bit overlooked, even though Lilies and Tides and some of those albums, and even the stuff on DIN has been reissued. I still feel like the DIN stuff is a little bit overlooked. But Aerovane, fantastic producer, comes in number 5 at my favorite IDM artist of all time. right, so coming in number 4 is Bola, Daryl Fenton. And was recognized early on the artificial intelligence work, so he's always been tied to the IDM style. But his run on Scam Records for like 10 years was just fantastic. And it started out with 1998's Soup, and then went into some of his early EPs at the same time, just before that and after that. Shapes, this is the collection of the Shapes. And then also Fuiti in 2001 was excellent. Nays, which is 2004. Krugini, 2007. I'm totally butchering these names. I'm sorry. And then he, after a long break, finally came back in 2017 with DEG. Hopefully, we hear some more music from him in the future. Love Bola's work, and when I think of Bola's work, like he seems to be one of the most inventive in IDM. Like there's been times where he's included like some like rapping in there, like on some of the like a couple tracks on Nies and Cougarine. Like there's almost some talking in the background. Um, some of his tracks are very dark. Some of them are very beautiful. Like his stuff on Soup is fantastic. Like For Casa and a few of the tracks on there are just amazing. And just an awesome producer. And I think anybody who knows Bola's work um, loves his work. And if there was any artist on this list that is underrated, that often gets overlooked as far as like the top tier IDM artists, when I hear people talk about like Square Pusher and stuff like that, it's all good, but when people overlook people like Bola, I just kind of like, what about Aerovane? What about Bola? What about Manual? All these great artists get overlooked sometimes when people talk about the best IDM artists, and Bola seems to be one of the ones that often gets overlooked, but not for the hardcore IDM artists. He doesn't. All right, so now we've come down to my top three artists in IDM's history. And I didn't necessarily want to pull out my physical collection, CDs and vinyl of these three particular artists. Just know that I have a lot of them. It would just be like going through their entire discography because they have a good amount of work. And with these particular artists, I have most everything on both formats as well because I've just collected everything they've done for the most part, and reasonably that is without spending a lot of money because some of them go for a lot of money. But yeah, coming in at number three is Aphex Twin. And you might be questioning me on why Aphex Twin is so low. And it's partly because of the other two artists above them are I feel like is just a little bit better in some ways, but it's really more about it'd be a tougher decision if I thought of Aphex Twin's music all as IDM. And there's some stuff in Aphex Twins I don't necessarily consider IDM. When I think about just his IDM music, you think of I care because you do. Think of like come to daddy and Ventolin and drugs. Certainly, drugs is more IDM. But when I think of Saw and Saw 2, I don't necessarily think of those as IDM. I think of those as ambient techno, especially Saw 1. That one's there's no jittery beats really in Saw 1, and it's more ambient techno and maybe even soundtrack music more so than IDM. And then I think of his stuff under Polygon Window. That's like more tied to techno and rave. And then I think of his music as Caustic Window. Again, more rave, more techno. So a lot of his early music I don't consider IDM. Now, the track On, the single On, which is one of his classics, that I consider sort of the start of his IDM period. And so when you think of Aphex Twin's music, for me, the IDM stuff is really 93 through 2001. And certainly some EPs in there as well. And I would say he's since he kind of returned with Zero in 2014, I do believe a lot of that stuff, and certainly the EPs over the last 10 years have been more tied to his IDM, but still there's a little bit more of a drill and bass feel in there. He's gone to some vintage ravey music, especially on Zero. There's some tracks in there that kind of hark back to rave music and techno. And so there's a lot of stuff I don't consider his Aphex Twins music IDM. So when I factor in the stuff that I do feel is IDM, he comes in third place. And just a fantastic producer. I just wanted to mention that because some people might think it's kind of low. But if I was to value his overall music, it would be hard not to put him into number one spot. But this is really a list about IDM style of, as far as IDM, the subgenre of IDM, and not so much their overall careers, or really them as a producer in some ways. It's really them as a producer in IDM style of music. And such a fantastic producer, Aphex Twin, coming at number three. One of the great memories that I have about playing Aphex Twin's music was back in 1995, and when I Care Because You Do came out, and you can see it up there. Just a fantastic album. One of my favorite, I'll have to do my favorite IDM albums of all time. That would certainly be up there. People always talk about like Saw 1 and Saw 2 being like great examples of music that totally changed the landscape of electronic music. There was nothing out there that sounded like Aphex Twins. I Care Because I Do. That kind of started the Window Licker and Come to Daddy and sort of his that start of his career. But nothing sounded like that album. And I remember my friend at the time, he wanted to go to the beach, and so he took his girlfriend. Us three went to the beach, Manhattan Beach, and on the way he was like, "Hey, you got something new to play? I just got these new speakers in my car. He got these Infinity Kappa speakers, which if you know Infinity speakers, especially car speakers, they're very bright, very very bright. And he got these. They were mids and separates. He was very much into electronic, into stereo music, as we all were back in the early '90s. I was a huge part of the lowrider car clubs, that sort of period, and stereo car competitions. I should do a whole video about that time and the music involved in those times. But Yeah, so he wanted to try out his speakers, and he had just got them installed, and he had two sets of mids and highs in the back of front and back of his car, and I think he had like a bazooka tube, which were popular for that time because he had a smaller car. It was like a Civic, and so I was like, hey, let's play this Aphex Twin, and it was so abrasive. And they had came from like hip hop, but they were open to other styles of music, and they like dance music as well. But when I played that when I played that album on those speakers, and you just saw their faces of like, and then you heard like Ventolin come in with the high pitched noise and just some amazing tones in that. It's just a memory that always sticks with me is when I think of Aphex Twin and that particular album, which I think is his best IDM album. If I was to really narrow down what IDM style is, I don't necessarily consider again Saw 1 and 2 to really be IDM in most respects when I think of the entire genre as a whole. But just a fantastic memory, and just playing Aphex Twin at the beach and people just going like, "What is that?" I'm like, "Yeah, that's Aphex Twin. It's badass, right?" Yeah, love Aphex Twin stuff. Hey, well, I found a little bit of I found a section of my IDM records. So just wanted to show this real quick. There's Bola's Cougarine. One thing I forgot to mention was Bola's work under Jello. Awesome stuff. This stuff was on, I think these were on Warp Records, if I'm not mistaken, and also the EP as well for Jello. Um, Also, Bola's Mover, awesome. Gotta keep these together. I couldn't find these records. I was like, where is my phoneme section too? Here's the phonetic, also Hydro Electro, which I was mentioning earlier, on vinyl, and then here's the Aerovane one as well. But also Aerovane's early one on Din, his EP was fantastic as well. right, coming in at number 2 is Boards of Canada. The amazing Boards of Canada, awesome duo, such iconic albums when you think of the genre. Um, there's some of Boards of Canada that I feel like is very down tempo and even soundtrack like sometimes. But they're always tied with IDM, and they definitely do a lot of IDM style music. But they're probably more so tied to IDM because they were on Warp Records. But I think of them sort of as a down tempo artist in some respect. But I think everybody puts them in the IDM um, category. I remember back in like 2004, I was at a record store and I ended up getting. You can see I got a copy up there. That one's it's hard to point over there, but that one's actually still sealed. But this is the first reissue back in 2002 they did, and I was at a record store in 2004, and I picked up both these copies for $25 each. I was just blown away. They're both sealed copies of Boards of Canada. I was just like, "Are you serious?" And because I didn't know it got reissued, and in 2002, and so it's great to find two sealed copies. So obviously, I picked them up, and that one up there is still sealed. And I there's a couple groups in my life that I've turned my brother onto as far as like IDM style, and Boards of Canada is one of them. The other one is actually number one as well, but um, my brother loves Boards of Canada music, but like there's nothing like their music. I mean I could just go on for days, and I'm sure anybody who likes them could go on for days talking about all their amazing music, and there's some great videos online as well. But fantastic music, beautiful place out in the country, Tourism, Campfire Head Phase, just so many good tracks, so many good albums. Hopefully we get something new from them again. But just fantastic artists, and my second favorite overall, favorite IDM artist of all time, Boards of Canada. All right, and coming in at number one is Autech, the amazing duo. Fantastic. Just love their albums and love their experimental nature as well. And especially them doing live. I got a chance to see them live in 2005, 2007, and 2016. And I love how they play in the dark and they just experiment live and they have no direction really of what they're going and what they're really planning on doing live, and I really respect that a lot. Not everything goes off as great as you would hope, but that's what happens when you do it live, right? I mean, but I really respect that because nobody else is doing it to that level, and consistently, and been doing that for so long. And every time an album of theirs come out, it's like an event, and it makes you want to revisit their old music. And even if you don't, there's been ups and downs in their careers, and some people haven't fully liked the direction of every album that's coming out, but still, because of their prior work, they still, for the most part, get excited when a new album comes out, and it rejuvenates them about their career and listening to their old albums, and that expectation you hope to get blown away like you've been blown away in the past. That's an amazing feeling. There's not too many artists out there that have had ups and downs in their career, and every time they come out with an album, you still get as excited as the first time you heard them play because you just know what they're capable of doing, and you just hope it's in the vein that of the style that you like, and that says a lot because no, I don't think there's any artist that certainly Aphex Twin probably has that, maybe a little bit of Boards Canada, and that's why they're really high on this list. But every time an album of those three come out, it's just like an event, and I love the way they market their music as well. It's you know it's artistic in a certain way, and I love their graphics and Design Republic's. Their graphics do a great job, um, as well, and as well as Boards of Canada and Aphex Twin. Just always love their. They feel like they're three of the artists that have been for a long time leading the way as far as how they present their music, and it kind of comes from that lineage of like Factory Records and New Order and things like that. Even Depeche Mode of substance over image when it comes to their artwork in a way, and Autech has been one of the leaders in that. So just from a visual perspective, their albums, sound wise, live wise, not even, and that's all part of their music as well. And just their music alone would probably make them a number one. But considering all the other parts of their career and just the choices they've made along the way and their trajectory toward their career and going on over 30 years now, just an amazing career. Amazing duo. Autech comes in at number one, my favorite IDM artist of all time. All right, so I hope you enjoyed these 5 videos of my favorite 50 IDM artists of all time. Really enjoyed doing this list for you. Really enjoyed sharing one of my favorite tracks of each artist. I always like to put some music in my videos. I don't just want to talk about the artist. I definitely want to share the reasons why I talk about the artist and share their amazing music. And hopefully you enjoyed the track lists on these videos as well. And well, I really appreciate your time in watching these videos. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on the list. And maybe if you'd like to do your list, put them down below in the notes. If you want to do your top 10, top 50, whatever you'd like to do on your favorite IDM artists. And I certainly have missed some artists. I can think of a couple off the top of my head now that I've sadly missed in this list, and I'll definitely adjust those on my list on my Discogs page, where I do have my top 5 IDM artists. Maybe someday, especially with your recommendations and the artists that come out in the future, maybe it'll expand to a top 100 IDM artist of all time, and I'll include some ones that I forgot, as well as some ones that I'll learn about in the future and ones that I don't know about that people have already recommended a couple artists that I haven't got a chance to check out. But yeah, thanks for your time in watching the list, and that was my top 50 IDM artists of all time.